Imagine a besieged fortress, not by an overwhelming force from outside, but by the silent, persistent sabotage of those within. This is the metaphor that Andrew Tate, controversial social commentator and internet personality, invokes when discussing the current state of Western society. His words are as incendiary as they are thought-provoking. You cannot fight an enemy with traitors in your ranks. Tate declares, lambasting what he sees as a self-destructive tendency among white Westerners to betray their own heritage and future. It's a statement that demands attention, not only for its bluntness, but for the uncomfortable questions it raises. In a time when conversations about identity, migration, and cultural legacy are more polarized than ever, Tate's criticism cuts through the noise to expose a deeper anxiety. Our Western societies, particularly white Europeans and their descendants, undermining themselves from within? This article delves into the heart of Tate's argument, exploring the roots of internal division, the contentious politics of migration, the historical context of ancestral lands, and the enduring question, what does it really mean to betray one's own? Tate's critique is not aimed solely at external actors or migrants. Rather, his primary scorn is reserved for what he calls white traitors, those within the Western, predominantly white populations who advocate for policies or cultural shifts that, in his view, erode the foundations of their own societies. To Tate, the greatest threat is not the influx of new arrivals, but the willingness of many native citizens to welcome that influx, often at the expense of their own traditions and security. He doesn't mince words. White people betray themselves endlessly, Tate asserts. It's a claim that resonates with a segment of the population feeling besieged by rapid demographic change and a perceived loss of cultural cohesion. But is this truly betrayal, or is it the inevitable evolution of modern societies? At the core of Tate's argument is the idea that Western societies have become so enamored with ideals of openness, tolerance, and progress that they have lost sight of self-preservation. In his view, the relentless push for more migration, multiculturalism, and globalization is not an act of altruism, but a form of cultural suicide. He points to statistics, like his claim that 75% of white people beg for more migration, to illustrate the extent of this phenomenon. Whether or not the number is precise, the sentiment reflects a broader anxiety that the majority population is complicit in its own marginalization, actively supporting policies that could undermine its future. Supporters of migration and diversity argue, of course, that such openness is the very hallmark of a civilized society. They contend that embracing newcomers enriches the cultural fabric, drives economic growth, and upholds a moral high ground. For them, resistance to migration is often equated with intolerance or even racism. Tate, however, flips this narrative on its head. To him, the real intolerance lies in the refusal to acknowledge the legitimate concerns of those who fear displacement, who feel that their voices and interests are being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. The concept of traitors is a powerful one, evoking images of betrayal, sabotage, and the ultimate violation of trust. But what does it mean in practical terms to be a traitor to one's own society? For Tate and those who share his perspective, the answer lies in the advocacy for policies that fundamentally alter the demographic and cultural landscape without the broad consent of the people. They see such advocacy as a breach of the social contract, a prioritization of abstract ideals over the tangible well-being of one's own community. Critics of this view argue that societies are not static and that change, however uncomfortable, is both inevitable and often beneficial. They point to the long history of migration and assimilation that has shaped every nation, including those now expressing the greatest anxiety about it. Yet, the charge of betrayal sticks precisely because it speaks to a deeper human instinct, the desire for continuity, belonging, and trust. When people feel that their leaders or even their neighbors are more loyal to outsiders than to their own community, the bonds that hold society together begin to fray. Much of Tate's rhetoric hinges on the idea of ancestral lands, territories passed down through generations, bound by shared history, culture, and blood. The notion is evocative, conjuring images of ancient villages, family homesteads, and a sense of rootedness that transcends time. But in a globalized world where millions are on the move and borders are increasingly porous, the concept of ancestral land is both powerful and problematic. Who, after all, has a legitimate claim to any given territory? History is replete with conquest, displacement, and migration. The very nations now struggling with questions of identity were themselves forged by waves of newcomers. Nonetheless, the attachment to land and heritage remains a potent force. For many, it is not simply a matter of property or resources, but of identity itself. The fear is not just that land will be lost, but that the very meaning of us will be diluted beyond recognition. Tate's warning is clear. White people need to stop being mad at blacks and first get mad at their fellow white traders who advocate for giving away of ancestral lands. In other words, the true danger is not from those seeking a new home, but from those willing to surrender the old one. Underlying much of the contemporary debate about migration and identity is a sense of historical guilt. Many Western societies, haunted by the legacies of colonialism, slavery, and racism, feel a moral obligation to atone for past sins. This sense of responsibility often manifests in open-door policies, affirmative action, and a reluctance to assert cultural boundaries. Tate dismisses this as pathetic, arguing that self-flagellation is no substitute for self-respect. He contends that the obsession with guilt has become a form of self-sabotage, blinding people to the legitimate interests of their own communities. Yet, for many, the willingness to acknowledge past wrongs and seek redemption is precisely what distinguishes the West from more insular or authoritarian societies. The tension between guilt and pride, atonement and self-assertion, is at the heart of the current cultural crisis. Perhaps the most provocative aspect of Tate's argument is his insistence that internal division is a greater threat than any external foe. You cannot fight an enemy with traitors in your ranks, he repeats, echoing a sentiment as old as civilization itself. History offers ample examples of societies undone not by invasion, but by internal decay, by infighting, corruption, and a loss of shared purpose. The Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and countless others fell not simply because of external pressure, but because they lost confidence in themselves. Is the West facing a similar moment? For those who share Tate's concerns, the signs are ominous. Declining birth rates, shrinking national pride, and an elite class seemingly detached from the interests of ordinary people. For others, this narrative is itself a dangerous myth, one that scapegoats the vulnerable and stokes division for political gain. So, what is to be done? If we accept, even for a moment, that there is a crisis of loyalty and identity within Western societies, how should it be addressed? Tate's answer is uncompromising. Stop blaming outsiders, and start holding insiders accountable. Demand loyalty, defend heritage, and reject what he sees as a self-destructive impulse to give away what generations have built. Yet, the challenge is not simply to choose between openness and closure, but to find a balance that preserves both identity and humanity. Societies that wall themselves off from the world risk stagnation. Those that abandon all boundaries risk dissolution. Perhaps the real task is to redefine what loyalty means in a world where identities are increasingly complex and intertwined. Is it possible to honor one's heritage without succumbing to fear or resentment? Can a society protect its core values while still extending a hand to those in need? Andrew Tate's rhetoric is deliberately provocative, designed to shock and galvanize. Whether one agrees with his diagnosis or recoils from his prescriptions, there is no denying that the issues he raises are among the most urgent of our time. The debate over migration, identity, and loyalty is not going away. As Western societies grapple with the twin pressures of change and continuity, the question of who belongs and who betrays will continue to shape the future. In the end, every society must decide what it is willing to defend and at what cost. The answers are neither simple nor easy, but the conversation is essential. Whether one sees Tate as a truth-teller or a provocateur, his challenge cannot be ignored. You cannot fight an enemy with traitors in your ranks. The fortress may yet stand, but only if those within can agree on what is worth defending and why.